The gender wage gap. It's been a staple of the feminist argument for probably decades. For a long time, people said that the gender wage gap was 28%. Some studies have found that it's actually between 3 and 5%, and in my opinion, it seems like we've actually done a good job of reducing the wage gap, regardless of what the reason is. And this issue is very contentious. Now, at the BBC, several women started to complain that there was discrimination ongoing within the BBC, so sure enough, the BBC decided, okay, we will audit the company to figure out exactly what's going on and rectify the problem. And sure enough, the BBC actually did find a pay gap. And ultimately, do you think they ended up paying women more? Well, technically yes, they did, but more men ended up receiving raises than women did. To a lot of people, what happened at the BBC is a backfire, that women were demanding pay equity, but more men ended up getting raises. Now, before I get into all that, I want to give a quick shout out to today's sponsor, all of you guys. If you haven't already, go to patreon.com/Timcast and become a patron today. There are several different tiers to choose from. Most notably is tier 1. At $10 per month, you'll get access to behind-the-scenes photos and commentary videos, secondary content that I will produce as a bonus to all of you, and I try and do this as much as possible. So please consider becoming a patron at whatever level you feel comfortable today to help support my work. Now, according to The Hollywood Reporter, BBC pay report finds no evidence of gender bias, promises to address unfairness. The UK public broadcaster unveiled proposals to respond to key issues raised by an audit, as well as broader criticism voiced since it revealed in the summer that 2/3 of its highest paid stars are men. And this was one of the biggest criticisms that people had with the BBC. That the highest paid personalities at the BBC, most of them are men, and they were getting pretty exorbitant salaries. So this raised some concerns, resulting in 6 male BBC presenters agree to pay cuts. The BBC said Hugh Edwards, Nikki Campbell, John Humphreys, John Sopel, Nick Robinson, and Jeremy Vine had all accepted reduced wages. The move follows Carrie Gracie's resignation as BBC China editor in protest at unequal pay between male and female international editors. Humphreys said he would be earning hugely less than the £600,000 he was. On his way into work at Radio 2 on Friday, Vine was asked by reporters why he had agreed to a lower wage. "I think it needs to be sorted out, and I support my female colleagues who have rightly said they should be paid the same when they're doing the same job," he said. "It's just a no-brainer, so it wasn't a problem for me to accept one." Now this story, these pay cuts came before the revelations in the actual audit that revealed there is a pay gap of about 6.3%, some people round it up to 7%, which is normal in many industries that we find even in the United States. But it also found there was no gender discrimination at all. And this coming from the BBC itself, so as the saying goes, we investigated ourselves and we found no evidence of wrongdoing. But I think we're going to use the BBC just because we'll keep this one internal. BBC Review finds no gender bias in on-air pay decisions. Their report, published on Tuesday, found a 6.8% gender pay gap among on-air staff. Responding to the report, the BBC said there would be substantial pay cuts for some men and pay rises for some men and women. Director General Tony Hall said important issues had to be tackled. The Director General said today's report does not find evidence of gender bias in decision-making, but it shows we have real and important issues to tackle, and I'm determined to get it right. He added, "The plans we're setting out today go further and are more important steps in modernizing the BBC and making it fairer. We've already made an important start. We're addressing unfairness in individuals' pay and want to close the gender pay gap and have women in half of our on-air roles by 2020. Those are big, bold commitments I'm really serious about." So they want to end the gender pay gap. They want to make sure that people are being paid the same for the same work. And what were the results? This according to the Daily Mail. The corporation then said it would award pay rises to 188 staff after PwC concluded they were underpaid for the jobs they do. 98 were men and only 90 were women. Last night, one well-known presenter said, "It's extraordinary that we could have an equal pay review and end up giving more money to men. How does that happen? The BBC has lost its grip on the issue, lots of women were very angry, and the review has only served to make them even angrier. Another said, "Nothing is so bad, the BBC can't make it worse. How can the BBC have gone looking for a way to resolve equal pay and end up giving pay rises to men? We believe this is a retrofit, a case of let's come up with a pay framework which justifies the status quo. Oh, and by the way, a bunch of men will get pay rises." Well, I will say for those particular women, it seems like this was a backfire, a legitimate backfire, that the calls for an audit into gender pay discrimination resulted in finding more men being paid the same. And naturally, many people who are anti-feminist or anti-SJW, whatever you want to call it, are gloating and saying it's rather funny that more men are getting paid money. They're getting rises, they're getting a pay raise in response to this audit. Now, let me just tell you what I think. I think this is actually a victory for feminists. Although there are some high-profile individuals that are essentially angry, they're actually angry with the fact that more men are receiving pay rises. The fact that feminists called for an audit into the gender wage gap and it resulted in many people being awarded a pay raise, that's a good thing, right? We found issues where we think people should have been paid more for the jobs they're doing, so we award them. And it just so happens that there were 8 more men than women who got those rises. This is a net gain for everybody. It seems like these particular individuals who are upset they're actually mad on some kind of tribalistic ground, that women should have been the primary benefactors of this audit. And although many women were, although many high-profile men took massive pay cuts to help resolve these issues, the fact that many people, regardless of their gender, are going to see equity is a good thing, isn't it? At its root, when you look at this more from a systemic point of view, it seems like the feminists have won. They wanted the audit, they got the audit revealed that there was a 6.8% wage difference, and it resulted in many people getting a raise. That's a good thing. But from a tribalistic and political point of view, some of these women are very, very angry, and some of the people on the anti-feminist side, whatever you want to call it, are gloating, when in reality we should all be like, oh, that was kind of cool. They did an audit, they didn't find gender discrimination. They said that the reasons for the gender wage gap are non-gender related. It might have to do with negotiating, and that's something we hear a whole lot of. But let's be realistic here. Several people got pay raises. The audit worked. This is a victory for calls to an audit. Those who requested an audit should be happy it happened. But this also shows us the double-edged sword of capitulation. That the BBC said, okay, we definitely want to deal with gender discrimination and the gender wage gap, so let's do it. And if we assume that what the BBC found is 100% factually correct, then it means there is no way to actually win. Because what would have happened if the BBC said, look, we found pay inequities among more men than women, but let's not pay them fairly because we want to appease the PR machine, we want to appease the feminists. Well, that would have been a problem for the BBC as well. So it seems now this just becomes an issue of trust, with many people saying they don't believe that the BBC is being genuine, that they're trying to uphold the status quo to make sure men can keep making more money, that it's a conspiracy of the patriarchy to make sure that men always get more money. But if we look at this from a more pragmatic point of view and say, well, they did an audit, the likelihood that this was a conspiracy is smaller than the likelihood this is legitimately what they found, in which case the audit was a success, people got pay raises, and congratulations. But then we realize that the people who are calling for the audit will be angry no matter what. And the only option you have is to bow down and just agree to whatever changes they want. And that's not equity, that's not equitable, that's not fair to the men who actually deserve these pay raises. Now, there's one more important fact that gets at the nuance of why it may be that more men received a pay raise than women. And it's one simple fact. There are 50% more male news presenters on the BBC than female ones. So this outrage is actually unfounded, because when you take the percentages, when you look at the amount of male employees versus female, and break that down to an actual percentage of males getting raises and females getting raises, then I think it's safe to say that percentage-wise, more females received a pay raise than men did. But by hard numbers, 8 more men received a raise. What does this mean? Put it simply, more women were underpaid than men. So there's one thing I want to talk about that might not have to pertain necessarily to the BBC, but has to do with media and video in general. What does a company look for when they want to hire a male presenter? They look for experience, talent. They want someone who is articulate and quick-witted. And what do they look for in women? Attractiveness. And this is a rational and reasonable gripe that I think a lot of people should be bringing up. Why is it that there may be a pay gap that's nothing to do with gender and everything to do with experience? Well, when it comes to media professions, when it comes to movies, when it comes to art, when it comes to video, everybody wants a younger woman, and a younger woman is likely going to have less experience, in which case companies will likely hire a younger female for a job than they would for a male, simply because the male's going to have more experience and is going to beat out all the other males, and these companies want to put attractive women on the air. And I think that's something that's an important fact that a lot of people should talk about. It's not necessarily a data point, it's just my cultural opinion, and so don't take it as fact or anything like that. But I think we're all aware that media, movies, whatever it is, has a bias towards younger women, in which case those women will be less experienced and will have less of a foot to stand on in terms of negotiating a higher salary. So what do we see? More men getting paid more money. There's nuance to this argument. Both sides have something important to say, and often we throw the nuance out the window, and that's a problem. The BBC made changes, and even though they made changes, some people are still angry. And some people are always going to be angry, so it's hard to know exactly how you solve these problems. But you can let me know what you think in the comments below. How should the BBC have responded? Should they have done the audit? They did the audit, they paid more men than women. Was that smart? Was that the right thing to do? You let me know and we'll keep the conversation going. If you want to follow me, I'm on Twitter @TimCast. Stay tuned. New videos every day at 4 p.m. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you tomorrow.